In the previous video, we created a new GKE cluster and linked that cluster to GitLab CI/CD, so it is ready to deploy an application to Kubernetes. We also took advantage of the GitLab Applications dashboard to install some really useful Kubernetes applications directly inside our new cluster with just one click. First, we installed a GitLab runner in the cluster to execute all the builds, and then we installed Kubernetes Nginx Ingress so we can expose a WordPress website over HTTP. And we also installed Cert Manager, which will give us the ability to automatically generate SSL certificates using Let's Encrypt. In this episode, we are going to create the GitLab CI/CD and the Docker container that we need to deploy a WordPress website using Skaffold and Customize. If you don't know Skaffold yet, don't worry. Skaffold is a very simple command line tool which was developed by Google, and it makes it really easy to set up CI/CD for local, development, and production environments within Kubernetes. It handles the full workflow of building and pushing Docker containers to the Docker container registry, wherever it may be, and deploying applications to Kubernetes. Skaffold doesn't require any server-side components to be installed in the cluster, which is great news. All it needs is to have the necessary credentials to have access to the Kubernetes control plane API server. This is great because it means we can run Skaffold pretty much from anywhere. The first thing we need to do to set up GitLab CI/CD with Skaffold is to create a Docker container which has all the necessary components like Skaffold and the Google Cloud SDK inside. So let's do that first. So I'm going to create a Dockerfile. I've prepared beforehand all the different command line arguments that we need to install everything we're going to be using. So I'm going to use as a starting point the image from Google Cloud SDK. We are using Alpine, so Alpine, the way you can install any new software in Alpine is using APK. So I'm going to just copy and paste some code that I've already prepared, which installs the components that we need. So as you can see here, we install first some common tools. We install Skaffold, the latest version of Skaffold, and that's about it. We already have the Google Cloud SDK because we are using this image itself as a starting point. Okay, so now that we've created a Dockerfile, let's just test it and see if we can build it with Docker. So we're going to do a Docker build. So we're just giving a container a name. So I'm going to call it Skaffold with Google SDK. So we have to pass in a -f, and we specify what is the Dockerfile name, and then dot for the current directory as the context. And that should be it. So we are building now our new Docker container, which is going to be used by the GitLab runner to do any builds. And in this way, whenever we start creating our build scripts, we'll be able to call Skaffold or make any use of the Google Cloud SDK, wherever it's needed. So the next step would be to publish this into, for example, a public Docker repository, or it could be a private Docker repository that you have access to. I have already done this beforehand, so I've actually published that on the public Docker Hub. So just to give you an idea, if you wanted to do that yourself, you would need to log in the Docker repository. The default Docker repository is docker.com, and for that you would need credentials for docker.com. And after you log in, you would do a Docker push of your repository name. So in this case, code mental. Yeah. So in this way, you can make this image publicly available, and then you can use it later on for your build. The next step is to create the gitlab-ci YAML file. So let's create our gitlab-ci YAML file. It's always in the root, and it's named gitlab-ci.yml. The first thing I'm going to do is to add a reference to the image I built in the previous step. So this is a public image, and it should work for you as well. I'm going to specify the service Docker.dint. This is to allow me to run Docker inside Docker, and that's needed so we can build Docker containers during the build. Then we're going to create the different stages of the build. So I have 3 stages. Build, which is going to build the Docker images for WordPress and, for example, for MySQL if we need to. Then we have the stage review. Review means that we are working on a branch and we are just doing development of the website. We want to test it and we want to see it on a URL, but we don't really want to make it available to production. So that's why we call it stage review. Then the last stage is called production. So that, as the name implies, at this stage, the tasks involved with the stage production are going to be affecting the production environment. So whatever you do there, it's going to go to production and it's going to be live. So now we can just define a few tasks. So for example, build review. I'm going to copy and paste something I've prepared previously. So we have build review here. As you can see, we're specifying the stage build. We have the environment. The environment name is based on the commit reference name, which is a variable that GitLab fills in for you. This is going to be typically, for example, if you create a branch called development, the environment name is going to be development, and so on. And here, the URL of our environment is going to be ci environment slug.domain name. Ci environment slug is the same as the commit reference name in this case, for example, development. And then the domain name is the base domain that we're going to use, for example, to host our website in. For example, it could be example.com. So in fact, we're going to define some variables that we're going to need. For now, I'm just going to put placeholder values. So domain name example.com. And here I also specify the production domain name, which is going to be needed later. And it's also example.com. So for example, if I create a development branch, then there will be development environment with the URL of development.example.com. Simple. So just wanted to further explain what else we have here. So I'm just going to put some very simple echo here. So echo build review. So we have the URL, I've already explained that. Then on stop is the task that you're going to call whenever you want to delete this environment. So it's, in this case, it's called stop review. Script is basically the steps that you want to execute for the build. You could have a list of steps here. You can have echo multiple scripts being called. Typically, at least for us, we're just going to create a script and call it from here later on. For now, it's just going to be blank. Then we have here something is quite important. We only want build review to be executed for any branch except the main branch. The main branch is the branch where any code that we already want to release to production is going to be stored in, which is separate from the review environment. Okay, so the next task I'm going to copy and paste, I've already defined beforehand, is the build production. As the name implies, we are basically building the code for production. So the build production task has a stage set to build, and we only want to run this task for the main branch. Next task we're going to define is recreate review. This is a task which is going to recreate the environment from scratch. So let's imagine we have an environment already. We're going to delete that environment first, and we're going to create it again to make sure that we have something which is completely fresh in terms of data. So without any changes we might have made onto the database or whatever. So everything else is pretty much the same. I'm just putting some echo statements here so that we can debug some of these tasks just to see how they're supposed to work, but without really implementing it just yet. As you can see here, there's a dependency. This task can only run after you execute build review. So the next task I'm going to define is the deploy review. The deploy review task is supposed to take the Docker image that we publish to the container registry in GCP, and it will take that Docker image and deploy it into Kubernetes cluster. So that's why we call it deploy review. And deploy review because we are only doing this for the review environment, which is anything except production. And you can see here the dependency on build review as well. Next, we're going to define the stop review function. When I say function, I mean task. It's the task that is called whenever you decide to delete a branch or an environment. And this is going to do all the cleanup that we need to do. Finally, we're going to add a new task for deploy production, which is a mirror of deploy review, but this is for production environment. And this is going to deploy the latest code into the production environment in our Kubernetes cluster. So whenever we create a new branch, GitLab is actually going to create a namespace in the Kubernetes cluster for us, and it's going to deploy the application in that namespace. So let's see how this works. So I'm going to commit this code. We should see already some builds happening. Seems like we have some error in our YAML file. Let's just take a look, see what we missed. So misspelled service should be services. Let's see if that happens. So we can see that it's already running our build. The first thing it's doing is calling build review, which is it's not what I was expecting. That's because the main branch is actually called master branch here, but I'll fix that in a second. So we can see that it's actually running a build. It's running a build in production, and that's because I pushed code directly to master, and that means that it goes straight to production. It's not really the workflow that it should be. I should be pushing code to that branch and then merging to master. And I'll do that in a second, just to demonstrate how the workflow works. Right now, this build production is not doing much other than it's just loading the image that I configured it to load, the one with Skaffold. As you can see, it's pulling the Docker image that I want, and it's going to actually execute the build inside this Docker container with that Docker image. Okay, so the next step in the pipeline is to build the code. Right now it's set to manual because it's production, so I wouldn't want to deploy something automatically to production. So whenever you are happy that you want to deploy, you click deploy, and in this way it will push whatever code it was built in the build stage, and it will push it to production. Okay, so it's all completed. We have deployed code successfully to production, or we pretended that we did. So next step, I'm going to demonstrate what happens when you create the branch. So let's call development branch. I'm going to create a development branch, and you'll see that immediately there will be a pipeline being called to actually build the branch. Basically, it's going to build the code for that branch. So you can see build review is being called. It will also create an environment. It's worth mentioning it. While this is running, I will just show you where those are. You can see the production environment, which we created in the earlier step. And then we have the development environment here, which is the one that we are creating right now. This was the environment that was created by mistake because I had the name of the master branch wrong. Okay, now the build of the code is completed, and I can also call deploy review. I can actually make this automatic so that we don't have to call it every single time, and I can show you how to do that. While that's running, we can see that instead of saying, for example, deploy production is set to manual. Deploy review is also set to manual, but we don't really have to set it to manual. So we just have to remove this, And then next time I commit something to a branch, then it will automatically deploy the code to the branch itself. It will not wait for my permission to do so. That's acceptable if you're working with a development environment, but not acceptable if you're working with production or even a staging environment. Note that I didn't actually create any tasks to deploy to staging. The only reason I didn't do that is to keep things simple. But if you are going to do this in a commercial environment, if it's not for yourself, I would also set up a staging environment, which would be the place where we actually test the code before rolling out to production. So the staging environment would take the code also from master, but it would be a safe place where you can test the code from master before you deploy it to production. But because this is just a demonstration, I'm not going to complicate things too much. Okay, so now it's all done, and you can see the build completed. We see our echo. That's all we need to see now. So we have the environments. The next step is going to be creating the code that builds a Docker container with WordPress and uses Skaffold to deploy that WordPress Docker container to Kubernetes. We're going to do that in the next episode. I think this is already a lot, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to click the like button, and if you want to watch more videos like this, and I do have more videos in the same series, I'm going to have a follow-up to this video. Yeah, don't forget to subscribe, and see you again soon. Happy coding!